History tells us that we need to be saved from ourselves, from our recklessness, and from our greed. That's a quote from Queen Elizabeth. And who would argue with it? We look out in the world that we inhabit and we see lots of greed, lots of recklessness, lots of lack of concern and compassion. We see racism and poverty and damage to the climate, and on and on and on the list would go. And in honest moments, we would have to say, would we not, that something is wrong. Something is twisted. And surely it's not just out there in them, it's here in us and inside us, is it not? In that wonderful second reading today from 1 Timothy, the writer there, ostensibly Paul, confesses, he says, that I am a blasphemer, a persecutor of the church, a man of violence, and the greatest of sinners. Who of us might not want to say they're the greatest of sinners, but surely things are not right with us on the inside. We are not okay. We're twisted too, aren't we? It shows itself in all kinds of ways. There was a man who died, and two of his friends came to his burial. When they arrived at the cemetery, there was a huge hole in the ground. And beside the hole was the deceased's gold Cadillac. The funeral director put the deceased in the front seat, and his two friends turned on the Cadillac, started the radio, started the air conditioning. One of them took out a 20-year-old bottle of scotch and laid it on the seat beside him. The other took out a fine cigar, put it in his pocket. They closed the doors, and the crane sitting there began to lower the car into the ground. And one friend looked at another and said, "Now that's living." That's a very profound joke. It talks about how we get twisted, doesn't it? Just how strange we can become. Certainly, one of the twisting points in our culture and in ourselves is this magnificent desire we have for accumulation, for gold Cadillacs and fine cigars, and whatever else you can think of. But we need to explore that. We need to find out what causes that. Years ago, my wife and I went away on a trip, and I had invited Mother to come and spend about 5 days with our two young daughters. When we arrived home to our large Victorian house, I noticed that the door to the basement was pulled shut. And that's not what we did because it stuck. And I went to my mother and I said, "Why is the door to the cellar closed?" And she said, "Because there are spiders and cobwebs and things down there." That's our problem. We don't want to go into the basement of our lives because we're afraid of the spiders and the cobwebs and the things we might find there. I'll give you a hint. You will find spiders and cobwebs. And you'll begin to sense that things are not well, even deep down. But why? Why is it that we always veer off in the wrong direction? Why is it we always pursue the wrong path? We have deep within us a set of deep needs, almost instincts, that are as powerful as our need for food and water. We have a need to deal with the guilt and the shame we feel, to get rid of it. We have a need to have a sense that life has meaning and significance for us. We need a way to deal with death and the finality of things. But here's the big one. Here's the one I think that really makes us tick. The thing that drives us in life. Here's what we want. I want to know that someone notices me and thinks I'm important. I want someone who says, you are significant, you are valuable, you need to be cared for. I want someone to say to me, I know you with all of your problems, and yet I am committed to you through everything. Well, where do we find such a thing? Where do we find that kind of love? For that's what love is. In that reading from Timothy, Paul there confesses who he has been, but he also says, I am grateful that I have been called to service. I am grateful that God's mercy has overflowed for me. I am grateful that God is unendingly patient with me. You see, there's been a whole turnaround here. He perceives himself in life in a different way. Not, I'm a miserable sinner. A miserable sinner. Are we not singing Amazing Grace later on this morning? I think we are. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, blind, but now I see. The grace is amazing, but do you hear what else you're confessing? Blind to the truth in life, lost in life, and a wretch. I looked up wretch in the thesaurus the other day. Miscreant, villain, rat, skunk. And yet, amazing grace. The chief phrase, I think, in that reading from 2 Timothy is where the writer there talks about the love and faith, or faithfulness is a better translation. The love and the faithfulness in Christ Jesus. Now, there are three great pillars upon which the Christian faith is based. The first is that God came among us and took on human form. Christmas time, the incarnation, the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Emmanuel, God with us. Do you remember that old motto from Hallmark cards? When we care enough to send the very best? Incarnation, then the death of Christ on the cross, when Jesus there openly, freely embraced all the tragedy, all the pain, all the twistedness and lostness of life. Notice, he did not try to escape. He did not run away. He did not call his followers for a rescue. He did not curse anyone. He did not blame anyone. He made it his own and therefore made it God's. And then the resurrection, where that love of God, that commitment of God shows itself to be the most powerful force in the world. There is nothing that can separate us from the love of God in Christ, proclaims the apostle. What if that's true? What if we have this utter commitment from God? Well, surely there's some fine print in the contract, right? Where there's a line in the sand at which we cross over. God would throw up God's hands and say, I'm done. I'm done. Our younger daughter, whom you may meet one of these days, called Sue and me up once with some pretty important news that she wanted to share. And I said to her, there is nothing that would cause me not to love you. And she said, ooh, I can think of a few things. Not with God, no few things. No line in the sand, no fine print, utter commitment. Always. Now, one of the facts of my life is that I have always had a deep sense that I was loved by God. Don't know where it came from. It's a gift, it's a grace. And I know myself well enough to know that if I had not had that constant sense, that foundational sense of the committed love of God, I would be a mess. I would be a lost human being. Ten or 15 years ago, I suppose, one of the native tribes around the Grand Canyon built a new attraction. It was a platform that extended out over the edge of the canyon. It was supported by steel struts and the like, so that you could walk out, lean over the edge, and look down into the canyon. The attraction was that the floor was transparent plastic. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I could get out on that thing. I have a feeling that if I stepped out on that plastic, that the whole thing would collapse and fall. And yet, if I could, it would be like walking on air, wouldn't it? What if I knew that it was a firm foundation for me? For me. For you. What if I knew that it was rock solid? Would that make a difference?